Welcome to the session today. My name is Matthew Vernhout. I'm the Vice President Deliverability with NetCore Cloud. I have two great panelists joining me today. I have Chaitanya Chinta joining us, otherwise known as CC. So you'll hear me refer to him as CC as we go. CC is the head of email business for NetCore Cloud, along with Christopher Marriott, a good friend of ours and an expert in all things RFP for email, which will be a very important topic over the next few months for many of our guests joining us today, as you are looking for a new email platform and moving forward. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to just throw a question right to CC as we start here. CC, can you tell us what's going on with Bronto?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction there. Hi, everyone. See, Bronto has, Oracle has decided to sunset Bronto in about a year's time. May 2022 is the time that they've chosen to sunset Bronto, right? And many of the Bronto customers that we spoke to has shown an inclination to move away from Bronto to a new ESP to choose a new ESP. And we thought this would be a right platform where we can do a webinar that we can probably talk about what it means to move to a new ESP, and probably talk about the kind of address some of the dilemma that the Bronto customers are in, or the kind of confusion that they are in, or answer to the set of questions that they might have when they're choosing a new ESP. And that's the whole point of we're doing this webinar. So jumping right in, when we're picking a new ESP, right? When a brand tries to pick a new ESP, there are a bunch of factors that go into play. And on a high level, you'd probably look at what are the advanced capabilities the product has from AI and machine learning capabilities when it comes to personalization. Does the product have send time optimization? Are there any advanced models that can help in driving better ROI or increasing the lifetime value of the customer? And what kind of support? I think this is one of the major factors that we have seen with Bronto customers, that support is one of the critical factors that they are looking at, right? And what is the kind of support that you're getting when when you're transitioning to a new ESP? That's another factor that you look into. And what are the kind of analytics, right? Like the kind of dashboards that are shown, or the kind of feeders that you get, or the APIs that you get to integrate into your platforms. What are the real-time analytics that the product gives that can be integrated and that can be used internally? Of course, when you're moving from one ESP to another, the inbox placement, of course, plays a bigger role, right? I mean, the transition has to be so smooth that there's no effect on inboxing and the ROI. And is it just the product, or is it beyond? Is it beyond the product, right? You get the consulting service, which does the ESP co-own your KPIs, marketing KPIs, and deliver better of the results. These are some of the things that we thought. I think, Chris, at this point of time, I mean, maybe I'll probably, you are the expert in the industry. What do you think the do's and don'ts for an ESP from your standpoint? I know you've been working with a lot of brands, so what are you seeing as a trend for Bronto customers specifically?
Sure. Let me get off of that screen and into this screen. And again, thanks for having me today. And Matt, thanks for that very kind introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the advice I've been giving Bronto customers in terms of how they should, to your point, CC, how they should approach the decision. What do we do? Do we do anything? What do we do? And if we do something, how do we start that process? So, and I think all of your suggestions on that last slide were very good about evaluating ESPs. I'm going to talk less about that and more about the things that lead to a successful outcome and the things that are barriers to a successful outcome. So, as Matt sort of teed up and as Cece talked about, you're on Bronto. What are your choices right now? You can obviously choose to stay with Oracle and have them migrate you. But as CC said, and I think in my conversations, that's really not a a path that many Bronto clients are looking into or seriously at this point. So if you decided that Oracle isn't a good fit for your company, and again, Bronto and Responses are extremely different platforms. Bronto being what I would consider a mid-market platform, and Responses being an excellent enterprise platform, but probably with way more horsepower than and way more complexity than the vast majority of Bronto clients are using now in Bronto, or even probably need. So if you're not going to go with Oracle for all those reasons, you need to decide how thorough of a process of vendor selection you want to do. You need to do something. So what is it going to be? One way to go would be look at some demos, ask friends for recommendations. Please don't do this. That is probably one of the worst things to do, and yet I see people do that all the time. Please feel free to reach out to me at chris@email-connect.com if you want to know why that's such a bad idea, because I'll go off on a 15-minute rant and they'll pull the plug on me. But or check pricing. You know, do you do, in other words, you do sort of a casual look around, and that's one way to go. Do you conduct a formal RFP and look at several ESPs that collectively might be able to address your email marketing needs? And a question I think a lot of you face as well is, do I hire an outside consultant to help me with either of the above? Because a consultant doesn't always have to come in and say, well, you got to do an RFP. There are many ways to get from A to B, a formal RFP being just one of them. When do you need to have a plan? Well, you probably should have a plan in place. You've got 12 months left. So you really need, if you haven't started planning yet, and I'm not saying thinking, you now need to plan. You need to get a plan right now. What are you going to do? Because again, in 12 months, if you're going to conduct a formal RFP, you will need most of that time for the evaluation, the negotiation, the migration to a new platform. Whatever you think an RFP is going to take you in terms of time, trust me, it will take more time than you think. So there is no time like the present if you're going to do a full-fledged, or like the present, if you're going to do a full-fledged RFP, you need to get started literally right now, right after this webinar today. Because when Bronto gets turned off, and it's going to be turned off, it's not going to be slowly, you know, a long tail of running out of steam. It's going to get shut off a year from now. And if you aren't on another platform already, whether it's Responses or whether someone else, you're literally going to be unable to send email for a period of time, which obviously is a disaster to you professionally and to your company's email marketing program. And if you decide to migrate to Responses, better to do it sooner rather than later, because there's going to be a lot of your fellow Bronto customers who probably are going to wait till the last minute and who will end up having to stay with Responses because they don't have time to RFP and migrate. And you don't want to be at the crush you don't want to be the 12th month crush trying to get migrated. So again, if you're going to migrate to Responses, don't wait. Ask them if you can start now. How do you determine if you're going to move what the best platform is? There's no substitute for a thorough RFP vendor selection process in my book. The longer you've been on Bronto, the less likely it is that you're going to understand the vendor landscape and the differences between ESPs. And trust us when we tell you, CC will tell you, I will tell you, Matt will tell you, there are huge differences between the platforms that aren't readily apparent. And the only way you can determine whether or not you should migrate, and it's really the only way to determine whether you should migrate from Responses and pay for an enterprise platform. Again, you could include Responses in your RFP if you wanted to do a full-on. It's almost a given that if you do go through a rigorous process now, you're going to end up with a platform that makes you think to yourself, why didn't I do this before now? You're going to say, I should have done this a couple of years ago. And you know what? You should have. But at least now you're ending up at a better platform. So I want to conclude with some thoughts on how you master an RFP if you do one. First, negotiate a contract extension with Bronto before you start the RFP. I've talked to many brands that contract runs out, June and July of this year. you need that. You're not going to finish an RFP. Before then, you need to understand what the costs are, what Bronto will do, and in terms of an extension. That you got to do that right away. I advise using a scorecard and make your decisions for the right reasons. If you're going to move, if you're going to look at ESPs, a scorecard-driven methodology that's objective in ranking the ESPs and rating them is going to ensure you end up with the best solution for your company. Complete the RFP and come to a decision. That sounds like, well, of course. Well, not of course. It's very likely if you don't get started soon enough, you're going to run out of time. You're not going to come to a decision, and then you're going to be forced onto responses. Understand what you absolutely need in your contract and what you don't. Don't sweat the minutia. When I work with clients and we help clients negotiate contracts, we always, help them understand that sort of what I call the big three critical things you need to get right, and everything else, it is stuff you shouldn't sweat. And lastly, and then while it sounds enormously self-serving, and it is, but that doesn't mean it's not good advice. Bring in an outside resource to help manage your RFP. Why do you need an outside resource? As I said earlier, there are much bigger differences between ESPs than you probably understand. That's not your fault, because you've been led to believe by everyone from Forrester to vendor sales teams that everybody kind of falls in the same pot. Everybody can do everything. Forrester does a ESP wave, and they throw platforms into their comparison that I wouldn't put in the same RFP. So how are you to understand what those differences are when Forrester makes it look like, well, everybody's kind of equal ESPs, they just some do it better than others? That's not true. Like, as I said, there's huge differences between ESPs, and you need to understand that. There's been ongoing extensive changes in the vendor landscape, and they continue to rearrange your options on practically a monthly basis. And this only adds to the confusion. Companies get bought, companies change their name, old brands go away, new brands come up, but the platforms remain the same. But again, navigating through that is a full-time job, which is my full-time job, and not your full-time job. So again, you don't need it. It's okay that you don't understand the differences. Bring someone in who can help you understand the differences. And lastly, pricing models have become much more diverse and complex over the last 5 years. Every vendor has a different model to get to the point that they want to get to for total contract value. Some rely still heavily on CPMs, others rely heavily on data storage fees, others rely on subscriber fees. There's any number of combinations of things that vendors are using to charge brands. And again, they don't line up cleanly with each other. The days of CPM and a blended services rate being the pricing model, those are long gone. So again, these are 3 reasons why an outside resource will make your RFP process much more efficient, much more effective, and almost surely guarantee a positive outcome. I'm not going to dwell on this because my time's coming short, but this is how we look at the vendor landscape. And as you can see, they're all over our map. And our map doesn't have, we're not, this upper right is not better, lower left is not worse. That's not how we lay things out. What we're trying to do is show how, on a broad scale, there's groupings of vendors that tend to have certain characteristics in common that they share with one another, and certain characteristics that are absent from everyone else. Again, happy to take somebody through this in detail after this meeting if you reach out to me. But again, this is where we start with our clients in terms of who should we be looking at. So lastly, as I said, questions, Email Connect is my company, chris@email-connect.com. I'm happy to answer any questions. We don't put down the meter the minute you email us and say it's time to charge. We're here to help you understand what your options are, and if we can assist you further, great. But again, if you just want to ask us a few questions that don't get answered today, happy to help you. So again, I'm here at the end. I'll be here through the end to answer questions. But again, thanks for the platform, Matt and CC. I appreciate it. And I'm in my 15 minutes. I'm turning it back over to you guys.
Thanks, Chris, very much. Get back to sharing the right screen here. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, if you have any questions for anyone, please do put them in the question and answer box. We will get to them towards the end of the presentation. So as we move forward, a lot of the things that Chris said really do make sense as you are progressing and trying to find your next platform. And right now we're sort of in this first stage, maybe even the second stage, depending where you are in your program. And it's really understanding what you're looking for, what you have, what you use for a platform, and then trying to match what you need or what you perceive to be needing in the next, say, 2 years after this for a new platform. So where do you want your platform to take you in the next 2 years? As you get ready to migrate, you obviously will need to inventory your entire program. You'll need to do some testing with your new platform, possibly some integration, as well as a warm up of your domain and IPs, and then also some compliance things. So we're going to go through these 7 items here rather quickly to give you a general idea of what a migration takes to switch from one platform to another. Because as Chris mentioned, these things aren't going to happen in month 12. And if you do try to get them in month 12, your program migration will not succeed, regardless of which platform you're trying to move them to. So this isn't a progressive timeline. It's an idea to tell you how long each of these items will approximately take as you progress. So first up, right, here we are. You're here, you've joined us today because you're interested in learning about the requirements for migration. Things to consider over the next 2 months, and I probably wouldn't go much beyond 2 months because, as Chris mentioned, migration happens, time takes place. It takes time to do all of these things. And you're going to have to go through and do a bunch of analysis to understand what you're looking for, what features an ESP has. Are there additional features they have, such as integration with SMS or social platforms that maybe are things that have been on your list of things to do, but you don't quite have the ideas of how to do them, or a platform that integrates to do those things. So really make your wish list now. And then when you're ready to do your RFP, include all of those things. You'll be surprised at what you can find. As you go through this same period, and I say this takes 3 to 6 months because I've seen so many complex programs that people forget. They forget a trigger program. They forget a journey that was important. They forget they have a web form that's doing something or an unsubscribe process. So really take the time to inventory your email program. And if you're not doing DMARC right now is a great tool that will tell you the source of all emails using your domain names and where they originate from. So this is a great way to evaluate and look to say, are we capturing everything? A good friend of mine is an email consultant and was implementing DMARC for one of his clients. And they said, oh, we have 3 vendors that send email on our behalf. When they implemented DMARC, they found 16. So you'll be surprised at the number of vendors potentially sending email on your behalf. And as you need to migrate, understanding that and potentially looking to consolidate those vendors into one platform is certainly something to look at for budgetary reasons. You also have to inventory all your forms, your existing DNS and how you're configured, as well as where you might have other data collection points. Is it point of sale? Is it a call center? Is it a mail-in ballot? Is it any type of form collecting data so that when you're getting ready to migrate, all the different pieces you need to migrate. From there, once you've selected your vendor and you're getting ready and you're ready to start setting up your new platform, make sure you export your old data, make sure you get everything. This is also something commonly seen during migrations. Someone forgets a suppression list, someone forgets an unsubscribe list, or they simply don't upload those into the new platform. So certainly there are lots of compliance issues to pay attention to as well. You'll take some time to configure your new DNS with your new platform, integrate everything, get everything working the way you expect it to, the way it currently is. This typically takes anywhere from a month, maybe 2 months, depending how integrated your platform is and the types of things you need to plug into. So plan ahead for all of these things because you're simply not going to have enough time or resources in April or in March of next year to complete all of these things. As you continue to do this, new APIs, new form integrations, everything needs to get done. If you are a company that takes 3 months to get a website change put in place, you need to account for that as part of your planning phase and as part of your setup. Preference center building, new names will need to be mapped. ETLs, if you're doing any type of automated daily transfers of information, will need to be built or updated. And in some cases, looking at integration between that time where you're straddling two platforms. How do you synchronize the data back and forth between those two platforms in the most efficient way? Also look at any journey that you currently have and a new capability that maybe you weren't integrating before, such as like I mentioned earlier, a journey that's not just email, but when an email bounces, maybe you have a shipping notice you're trying to send to a customer and that email address bounces. Are you able to then trigger an SMS message to that same user to say, your email bounced, but here's your shipping notice? Those types of things are important to consider if you're not doing them now. Consider this a blank slate for those programs you've been meaning to update, just never got around to doing it. You can start from scratch with a new platform. Warm-up is also important. This is something I find a lot of people don't account for. As Chris was mentioning, their contract starts to end. They're trying to maybe negotiate, or they're trying to look at what the next platform is. Warm-up across the board, depending on the size of your list, can take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to get to your full capabilities of mailing. And there are several reasons for this. Most of them exist on the mailbox provider side. So if you're trying to send mail to Hotmail, as an example, from new IP space, potentially new domains, new subdomains with new domain keys, all of these things become new reputation points where they're going to start judging you from zero. So these things don't necessarily just transfer over nicely when you switch between platforms. So all of these things need to be accounted for. So you can even look at, maybe there's easy points in your program to migrate. Maybe it's your welcome journey. That gets you started with a nice little drip of mail. Maybe it is your shipping notifications. There's another nice little drip that is constantly going that will help you with those warm-ups. And as you get ready to move the bulk of your program, you've already got a head start. Decisions on dedicated and shared IPs, those are also things you'll need to consider during the warm-up process. Being tightly integrated and working with your vendor to monitor your metrics, make sure that they're watching bounces, make sure that they're helping you along, making sure that everything is properly configured. And in most cases, it's not a straight line. You might have great success with Gmail, you might have great success with Yahoo, and have a lot of roadblocks with Outlook. So there are different pieces that are going to be moving at different paces, and you need to be able to account for those types of things as you migrate and work with your vendor as best that they can to help you manage these things. Maybe that's they can throttle the send rates that you're sending to a specific IP lower so that you can still do the amount of things you take, and they just trickle the mail out at the speed that's appropriate for the reputation and the warm-up phase for that mailbox provider. So certainly make sure you have those conversations with your new vendor. And lastly, this one's an important one, and I see this missed more often than not. Like, people simply forget. I started mailing today with my new vendor. My old vendor is shutting me off tomorrow, and that means all my links and stuff are broken. However, there are requirements under CAN-SPAM and CASL, which is the Canadian anti-spam legislation, that deal specifically with the length of time that an unsubscribed link needs to exist. For CAN-SPAM, that unsubscribe needs to exist for 30 days from the last message sent to that user. So if you sent me a mail today from your old platform, I need to be able to click on that unsubscribe link and have it work in 30 days. Being actually in Canada, where I am located, that link has to exist for 60 days. So there are legal requirements that you also need to consider as part of your migration, that when you stop mailing from your old vendor, you need to potentially look at, how do I adjust my unsubscribe process to carry me over that, call it 60, maybe 90-day window to account for these compliance issues. Now, some people have it easier than others. They may have a third-party preference center that's hosted that can plug into any platform, so that's not a big problem. However, if you are relying on your ESP's unsubscribe capabilities, definitely make sure that you account for this and that you synchronize your unsubscribes and your preference changes back and forth between all the platforms. Moving platforms is also a great opportunity to clean your data. It's a great opportunity to get rid of that dead weight that maybe has just been sitting there. These are people that have bounced, they've unsubscribed. You've just never got around to deleting them from your platform. Consider using this opportunity to do an address validation. Use this opportunity to do a list scrub. The reason for that as well is each ESP will process bounces differently. So there will be some messages that maybe weren't delivering from your old ESP for various reasons that might now deliver, or vice versa. There might have been messages that your old ESP allowed you to send mail to that your new ESP maybe won't, such as, a support at email address or a sales at email address as a recipient maybe won't be allowed from your new ESP where your old ESP let you do that, just for different policy reasons and different sort of acceptable risk scenarios for those different platforms. There are things to consider and have those as part of your conversation as well to understand, are there any global suppressions that the brand needs to be aware of? Even from the point of view of bounce management, bounce reporting. Some ESPs look at total send volume versus total delivered volume in regards to the bounce metric. So you may see some difference in your reporting that you're going to need to understand and account for as you move forward. Just a few things to really consider, right? Your deadline for switching is hard coded, as Chris said, end of May 2022. That date's not getting any further away. So there is a sense of urgency to work back and build the right work back schedule to get your program successfully migrated. As well as Q4 for a lot of marketers is a huge quarter in the year. And you may experience code freezes. You may experience program freezes. You probably don't want to be doing a warm up the week before Thanksgiving in the United States, which is traditionally the biggest kickoff to holiday shopping anywhere. You want to be set up either well before that or ready to trigger your migration immediately after the holidays. Those are your two options. If you can't do it now, and I suggest always sooner is better than later, because there's never an ideal time to migrate. There's always that next holiday. There's always that next program. There's always that next thing that you're launching. You need to be able to operate this now or later, but you need to be able to do it in an efficient, quick manner and really sort of move it. And like I said, the sooner the better, because you're going to experience roadblocks, you're going to experience bumps, you're going to experience challenges as you move. Regardless of where you migrate, there's always that one or two things that become a nitpicky problem that you need to address. And that's where working with the right vendor and the right partner helps you understand those different pieces. I'm going to now toss this over to CC, and CC is going to give you a bit on how Netcore can make this less problematic for you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And before I talk about this, I think we have a few questions on the chat. I'll probably take them. Matt, I think the first question is for you. In terms of warm up, is it necessary, or can we just get can we get a warmed up IP or probably a shared pool? I'm assuming this is a shared pool of IPs, and scale to scale volumes in a week's time.
So there are multiple different things that impact send volume and warm up. So from an IP warm up point of view, yes, if you're in a shared pool, there's probably some existing shared reputation on those IPs. Yes, there's probably some existing understanding from the mailbox providers as to what type of messages are being sent through those networks. However, IP reputation has become less important in many cases, specifically in places like Gmail, where domain reputation is their metric that they look at. And domain reputation really focuses on your brand, your domain keys, and as you change and migrate those things, you're going to start from zero again. So you can get some benefit from being in a shared IP, but going from zero to millions in a week is very unlikely on any platform these days.
Got it. I think that sums up the first question. Chris, I think the second question is to you. If when I'm moving from Bronto, should I move to another ESP or a marketing automation platform? I think there's this whole category of, I think in your landscape, there are a bunch of providers, falling around multiple categories. I think, there's a bit
I
of,
love that question. I love that question. And my answer to that is frankly, they're one and the same. And it really depends. What I've seen over the last 5 years and even more recently is that ESPs run from that label, and they want to be anything but thought of as an ESP, because ESPs in their minds from the vendors are thought of as sort of old legacy systems that do email. And whereas marketing automation platforms do triggers and automations and journeys, the reality is that the leading ESPs or the leading platforms do all of the above. The definition of what an ESP should be has evolved dramatically. Whereas when I think of an ESP, and as you should think of an ESP, again, you should think of multi-channel, email, SMS, push to mobile, push to app, all of that built in there. You should be thinking that promotional campaigns as well as triggered campaigns and triggers based on the widest range of things you can think of, from browse abandonment to the old cart abandonment to any other event that might happen. So, again, to just wrap this up, they're really one and the same. Don't be fooled by what a platform calls itself, because when you dig into the details, they really all sort of do the same thing. Some do certain things better than others, but that's part of your job in determining who's best for you. So long-winded way of saying, look at them all, because marketing automation platform, email platform, cross-channel manage, there's so many different acronyms out there, but they're all ESPs.
got it, Chris. Matt, I think there's an extension to the earlier question that on the whole warm-up piece. If I use my existing domain and migrate, can I still use the old reputation and scale faster? Would that be an option?
So it certainly helps. I wouldn't say that it's the final answer. Some mailbox providers have said by updating your authentication records in advance of migrating, they will take that into consideration, understanding that the IP space has changed maybe in your SPF records. You still have, regardless of what happens with the domain, you're still going to have changes to your domain key records, your DKIM records, I should say, which a lot of the mailbox providers will use. It's a natural thing. Migrating a DKIM record between vendors is extremely hard because most vendors control the private key requirements. So ideally, a migration focuses on your best performing customers first, the people that will evangelize on your behalf, are eager to receive your emails, or the high value emails such as password reset, purchase notifications, trigger notifications, that are going to be things that people will be highly engaged with. Those are the things you want to focus on. Where you want to watch out for, and this is specifically with Gmail and with Microsoft, sending to non-engaged users, especially non-engaged users in any significant number, will drastically hamper your warm-up. So it will help, but I would say it's not going to be the result to say go from 0 to 1 million in a week. It's going to incrementally be easier than starting from 0, but not enough to just migrate your full traffic in one day.
Got it. So what you're saying is it plays a role. You can probably fast track it a bit, but definitely not to a level where you can take it to 1 million emails in a week's time.
I wouldn't count on that. No, it may help, but it's not going to be the flip the switch from one platform to another overnight kind of scenario.
Got it. All right. So I'll probably pick it up on this slide, where how Netcore stacks up with the whole, with Contra transition, right? See, with Netcore, what you get, and whenever, and this is true for any ESP migration, right? Whenever a brand is moving from one ESP to another, there's a lot of, uh, you know, uh, a lot of factors that play into having a successful migration, and you will need a specialist who is aligned to you, who's looking at your migration from time to time and giving you suggestions on what trends are we seeing? Is the reputation building? Are there any challenges with, let's say, Gmail or an Outlook? As Matt rightly said, there are a bunch of factors that affect, right? So how is it progressing? I think there's definitely a need for a continuous monitoring on how the transition is happening for the entire warm-up period, and you will need an onboarding specialist to it. So that's what Netcore is going to align when you move to Netcore. So we will have a dedicated onboarding specialist who will be looking at your email program, right, from the kind of integrations that have been done, how the transitions have to be made, what are the kind of journeys that you can create, the similar journeys, how can you replicate on Netcore's campaign a customer engagement platform, and then to help you throughout the entire transition. There's an onboarding specialist who's going to help you with all of that. So that's where we want to step in. But right after that, I think while this whole thing is going on, there's a dedicated consultant who's aligned to your business KPIs, and then who builds your a custom warm-up strategy for you based on your business priorities. Every business has its own priorities. As there's no right time, or there's no single strategy that can be applied for all the businesses out there. So our specialist, usually the email expert that we align to you, uh, they understand your email program and build a custom strategy that helps you migrate in a very smooth fashion. And as we move, we don't stop it just with the migration, but we continue that consulting service further. And our specialists co-align with your email program KPIs, and we help you achieve them. So you bring your brand strategy to the table, and we bring our email expertise to the table, and together we can probably build a strategy which is better than the sum of individuals, right? So that's something that our Fed consultants do. Um, uh, so while this is on the people front, from the product standpoint, the kind of machine learning or AI features that are there which will enable you to get better insights on what's happening with your email program, and at the same time, how do you achieve better open rates and click rates? All of that is sort of baked into a bunch of our Raman AI engine, in terms of predictive segmentation, or the send time optimization features that we have. We typically understand your data sets, and we try to give you better inboxing and the ROI. From the delivery engine standpoint, today, let's say if it's Bronto or any other ESP out there. So what this is one core USP of Netcore, right? So we let's say for any promotional campaign that you send out, the way you send today, it's just like you publish a campaign and then it gets delivered, right? But what we do is we don't deliver your email campaign right away, right? We sort of create hundreds of micro segments. Suppose that you have scheduled a campaign to 1 million users. We create hundreds of micro segments behind the scenes, and we try to based on the composition of the segment, we set the throughput and priority which are different for each and every campaign, which essentially means that we predict who's going to open your emails first, and we try to deliver to them first. And then as we go down in the user base to the inactive users, we try to slow down the delivery too. so that we stay in the good books of, we take in the good books of mailbox providers and take advantage of something called dynamic reputation. And we give you that essentially, when you start the campaign, you start with best, you start delivering to the best of the users. That generates better engagement, and that reputation helps you achieve better inboxing overall. That's something that our AI engine is homegrown AI engine, which will typically achieve that for you. And the dashboards that and all of this is visible through a dashboard where you can get a 360-degree view of what's happening with your email program, on right from just email delivery, but also to the extent of you're getting the ROI of your email program. All of that is completely trackable. I think, yeah. So a quick brief about Netcore. We've been around for almost 23 years now. While founded in India, but now we are operating out of 21 plus countries with about 700 plus workforce across the globe now, covering from almost most of the continents. We're there now. And we're completely bootstrap company and profitable for the last maybe 20 plus years now. We've been most recommended ESP according to G2, and right from the customer support to we being the leader when it comes to their spring edition, the latest spring edition. And we are also nominated by our customers as as most recommended ESP on G2. Yeah. And at this point, I think we are open to take Q&As.
Yeah, so there's a couple more questions here, I think, for Chris, more so. So Chris, when you're considering building your RFP, which teams should you involve in that discussion internally, sort of maybe beyond just the marketing team, to look at feature sets and integration things that should be included from a vendor?
Yeah, we try to include really everybody who touches the email, or whom the email program in any way, shape, or form impacts their job. So the obvious ones are the email marketing team, and IT. Less obvious are things like customer service, where a tightly integrated email program can enable call center folks to suppress an unhappy customer, or to look up the last email that was sent. And oftentimes when I'm working with brands and I say I want to talk to the call center and customer service, they say, why? They have nothing to do with email. And my response is, yeah, but they could. And so it really is, merchandising, all of the different areas. The first question, or the first answer, is anybody who wants to be involved in the RFP process at a brand, you should welcome, because what you don't want is anybody feeling shut out of a process, and then after the fact, being passive aggressive or in other ways really just not embracing the solution that you've selected. You want everybody to embrace that solution. And one of the benefits, I talked earlier about scorecards. One of the benefits of a scorecard-driven methodology is everybody can fill out a scorecard who wants to. And it's a lot of times it's not fun. We have our scorecards in round one have up to 250 to 300 requirements spread out among 8 or 10 vendors, and our clients are asked to score every response on every vendor. And that's tedious and that's time consuming, but it's hugely valuable to understanding your options. And it is critical in our process to go, to get down to the final 4. So, to sum up my typical long-winded answer, you should involve everybody who wants to be involved, and you should involve beyond that everybody who might benefit from being involved, because you're expanding the value of your email program outside of the sort of default areas you may have considered it, may only considered it up until this point in time.
Great, thanks. And another question here, Chris, probably for you, but even CC, if you have an opinion on this, I'd love to hear it. But what is the biggest surprise that most brands experience when working through the process of picking a new platform as they go through that process with you?
I'll go first, CC, and I've seen this more recently. And Matthew, it gets to what I was saying earlier, that brands don't, it's very hard for brands to understand differences in platforms and even understand who they should be looking at, and which is another good reason to bring in an outside resource. I would say in my most recent enterprise RFPs, the biggest surprise for many of those brands was they picked a vendor they wouldn't have even included and maybe hadn't even heard of before we recommended they take a look at it, include that vendor in the process. So again, brands who have, who enter the process with sort of a set of people, usual suspects they should look at, when they broaden that, oftentimes end up choosing someone outside of that. And that surprises themselves that I hadn't even heard of these guys. I wouldn't have invited them.
So in my conversations, Matt, I think it's mostly the planning is what there is a bit of underestimation by brands on when it comes to transition from one ESP to other, right? They don't factor in all the things out. Like it's not, the planning is not very exhaustive by a good number of brands. They think that there's a 30-day time frame, and then within 30 days I should be able to transition from one ESP to other. So we've definitely encountered a bunch of those conversations, and yeah, so that will be one of the things that I'd probably put there.
Okay, and CC, there's another question here for you. It says, not all ESPs talk about AI. How does working with Netcore and the Netcore AI help with migration?
Okay, so I feel a good bunch of ESPs out there do have AI capabilities. It's not that we are talking about it. I think most of the ESPs out there do have AI capabilities when it comes to, maybe send time optimization is one feature, right? So it cuts across ESPs out there. But what's interesting is what it can deliver to you. What it can deliver to you from a result standpoint, while Netcore definitely has some of USPs when it comes to our AA-based email delivery, or I could probably talk about the predictive engagement piece also, right? So there are a couple of USPs out there, but what's important is from a transition standpoint, when you are just moving from one ESP to the other ESP, honestly, the AI features will not come into a great, they'll not add much of a value there. Reason being, any AI feature needs a lot of history to be built in, and they'll act on the historical data. And when you're switching from one ESP to other, you will not have a lot of history. It is mostly what you're carrying from as a fresh list, and you're doing a fresh start. So in that context, while you can enable AI technologies, but the limit, the kind of impact that they can create will be limited. But as you progress after the warm-up, once enough history is built, that's when the real power of AI comes into play.
Great, thanks very much for that. Chris, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. As I mentioned earlier, Matt, and one of the things you said made me think of this. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ESPs these days who will remain unnamed, whose primary source of revenue with a brand is records and data stored in the database. That's their primary revenue model, and it's migrated from the B2B world to the B2C world in a lot of ESPs. You had said, which I 100% agree with, when you're talking about migration, that your brands don't just want to upload their existing list, but their suppression list and sort of everybody that they've mailed who had a bad outcome. But if you're so what is your advice to a brand that had picked a new vendor who's saying, we're going to charge you by records in the database, and 80% of their records in their database, the brand, are either suppression lists or bad email addresses? do they bite the bullet and upload those and pay for addresses they're never going to mail to? Now, let me also say, I think that's a terrible pricing model and I'm very much against it. But how would you advise a brand who's faced with that?
So I think there's a couple different options. One, like you said, you can pay that model in order to have peace of mind that your suppression list is properly managed and properly taken care of. However, if you have an offline CRM where this data is synchronized, only uploading the data that you plan to use into your new ESP also acts in many ways as a suppression. You can't send to people that you don't upload.
Right.
So if you're only uploading your active mailable universe of recipients and customers, at that point, you do solve that problem as well. Where it gets into maybe some of the less obvious pieces is someone may have unsubscribed from your email, but is still very active in your app. So you have to maybe have tiers of consumers and how you want to upload them, where you say active to me as a brand means they're in my app, they're on my website, maybe they're subscribed to my email, maybe they're subscribed to my SMS, but they've unsubscribed from those. So you upload them because you need them for the other metrics, but you still have to upload them as a suppression for email, but they're still an active consumer. Now, if you have someone who is not using your platform, not using your app, not subscribed to your newsletter, and you still want to track them, leave them in your CRM. Don't even upload them to the platform, because then you're just paying for additional record space, like you said, for someone that you're never going to communicate with again. And only make those decisions to move those active consumers to the live platform.
That's excellent advice, folks, because many of you are going to face this. So I hope you remember what Matt said, because I think that was outstanding advice, frankly. If I have time to just add, unless there's another outside question, an addendum to that.
Sure. We have one more question after this, but go ahead.
Okay. So my addendum would be, I often advise brands that are sending transactional emails that if to check once that purchase confirmation, bounce it off your list. If it's a subscriber, the amount of promotional material you can include in that email is much higher than if you're not a subscriber. And if you don't have, I guess I'm answering the question myself. I guess if they're not in the database, they're not in the database. But if they're suppressed, you know what? Forget it.
This is actually very important, because there's differences, right? And like I noted earlier, I'm in Canada and you're in the US. So CAN-SPAM allows you to have multi-content message pieces. And this is an important thing to understand, where you can have your transactional message at the top and your promotional content underneath. That is still considered a transactional message under CAN-SPAM when it comes down to the definition of what types of permissions you need and who you can send it to, and some of the other sort of core consent pieces of the legislation. However, in Canada, if I have unsubscribed from promotional content, but you still need to send me a transactional message, because maybe I'm still an active shopper, I just don't get your email, maybe I use your app, you cannot send me promotional content, period. Even in a transactional message. Castle does not have the idea of a multi-part message. It's either transactional, period, or commercial, period. And if I've unsubscribed from commercial, you cannot send me any more commercial messages. So pinging against your active subscribed database is actually a smart thing to do, specifically in Canada, because if I'm still open for commercial content, you can send me commercial content in a transactional message with the idea knowing that it's transactional. They're not transactional by definition of the law, but allowed because I'm still subscribed for promotional content. But if I've unsubscribed from promotional content, you have to dynamically remove anything that's promotional and just send me the transaction.
And what if I'm in that middle category there? You've talked about I'm subscribed or I've unsubscribed. What if I'm in neither database?
So under Castle, you have to be at least an opt-in, implied, or express consent. So there is no idea of sending messages to non-consent based individuals, unlike
Got it.
cancel. So
We could have a great discussion on this. This may have to be a follow-up webinar.
this is a different webinar altogether.
Because we're running out of time, I can see, and I could ask you a million questions, but great stuff. And I know you have one more question.
Yeah, there's one more question, and I think this works for both of you. And I think, Chris, we'll let you go last as cleanup for being our guest today. I'm going to put this one out to you because you probably have different answers. When you are looking for your core success metrics as you're tracking your transition between ESPs, what do you look at, CC, as a core success in regards to things are going well during transition?
Okay, so the first is the reputation comes from, being a deliverability guy, I'd probably say reputation is the first thing that I'd probably say. Making sure that the reputation is going high or medium, at least on Google side and other mailbox providers out there. Reputation inboxing, and when it comes to the open rates and click rates, firstly it's parity, right? You don't expect the open rates and click rates to jump, out of the blue to a higher numbers just by moving the platform. First you need to hit parity, and then maybe after the successful transition is where probably you can look at optimizing them.
And Chris, when you look at this with your clients, what do you consider to be success during transition?
Yeah, that everybody loves metrics, and I look at more longer term rather than the short migration. Certainly success during migration is there's no unexpected, we didn't know you needed that, that's going to cost more. To me, that's the greatest sin a vendor can commit during migration, and we make sure that never happens when we're working with our clients, because that to me is, as long as there's no, there's going to be surprises. As you said, I loved your story earlier. It was like, we only have 3 ESPs. No, you have 15. Those surprises I'm okay with. Those happen all the time. Again, but we showed you something, but we didn't include it in our cost thing that comes up in a migration. That to me, as long as there's none of those, it's a successful migration. Broadly speaking, I think you don't really know how happy you are with the vendor until you've been with them a while. And a year in, 6 months in, if again your team is more productive, meaning the things they do day to day are taking less time. If your other sort of day-to-day metrics, open and clicks, are going up, but they might not be. Just going from one platform to another may not change that. That's your team. But again, if you're spending less time on getting the email out and more time thinking about it, that stuff will improve. So, again, in my typical way, I'll wrap up my long-winded way answer of saying, I look at it long-term. Is a relationship a good one? Is everybody happy? And is the email program improving 6 months out, 12 months out? Then that's a good migration.